In the elegant ballroom of Fairfield Country Club, a perfectionist bride was about to face her worst nightmare. What started as a dream wedding celebration took a shocking turn when her sister made a devastating announcement. Valerie Cox wasn't your typical marketing executive. For years, she had held her fractured family together, known for her unwavering loyalty. When Emma claimed she was pregnant with Valerie's husband's child, Valerie had no idea she was walking into decades-old deception. Her determination to uncover the truth would lead to complete family destruction. What began as perfect happiness would become psychological warfare. The Cox family would never recover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Valerie Cox stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the delicate pearl buttons along her sleeve. The morning light streaming through the tall windows of the Fairfield Country Club cast everything in a golden glow, making the ivory silk of her gown shimmer like something from a fairy tale. This was it, the day she'd dreamed of since childhood, the day that would finally unite her fractured family in celebration rather than crisis. "Stop fidgeting," Jessica Wong said from behind her, though her voice carried warmth rather than criticism. Jessica had been Valerie's anchor since college, the steady friend who never let her get away with her tendency to overthink every detail. "You look absolutely perfect." Valerie caught Jessica's eye in the mirror, noting the way her maid of honor was already dressed in the soft lavender they'd spent weeks selecting. Everything was exactly as she'd planned it, down to the white roses with touches of baby's breath that adorned the suite, the same flowers that would line the aisle she'd walk down in less than 2 hours. "I just want everything to be..." Valerie paused, searching for the right words. "This day has to be perfect, Jess. It has to be. After everything our family has been through, we need this. We need something beautiful to remember." Jessica moved closer, her forensic accountant's mind reading between the lines as it always did. "Val, you can't single-handedly heal 28 years of family dysfunction with one wedding." "I'm not trying to heal anything," Valerie lied, her fingers now worrying the pearls at her throat. Her grandmother's pearls, the something old that connected her to generations of Cox women who'd weathered their own storms. "I just want one day where we can all be in the same room and be happy. Is that too much to ask?" The question hung in the air as Linda Cox swept into the suite, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, and her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress impeccable. At 55, Linda still possessed the elegant bearing that had first caught Robert's eye decades ago, though fine lines around her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and carefully hidden worries. "The photographer wants to start family portraits in 15 minutes, Linda announced, her voice carrying that particular edge it always had when she was managing a situation. "Emma's just finishing her makeup." Valerie watched her mother's reflection, noting the way Linda's hands smoothed her skirt repeatedly, a nervous habit that had intensified over the years. "How is she this morning?" "Emma? She's fine. Beautiful as always." Linda's response came too quickly, too brightly. "She was just saying how excited she is to give her speech tonight." Something cold settled in Valerie's stomach. "Speech?" "The sister of the bride toast," Linda continued, now fussing with the flowers on the windowsill. "She specifically asked if she could say a few words during the reception." "I thought you knew." Jessica caught Valerie's eye in the mirror, her expression carefully neutral. They'd been through the reception timeline dozens of times, and Emma had never mentioned wanting to speak. But before Valerie could process this fully, the suite door opened again, and Emma herself appeared. At 25, Emma Cox possessed an effortless beauty that had always made heads turn. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves over bare shoulders, and the lavender bridesmaid dress Valerie had chosen suited her complexion perfectly. But something was off. A brightness in her green eyes that seemed too intense. A smile that appeared painted on rather than genuine. "My beautiful big sister," Emma said, moving to embrace Valerie carefully to avoid disturbing either of their gowns. "This is really happening." Valerie felt Emma's arms around her and tried to ignore the slight tremor in her sister's hands, the way she held on just a moment too long. "Are you okay, Em? You seem—" "I'm perfect," Emma interrupted, stepping back with that same too bright smile. "Absolutely perfect. Just like this day is going to be." She moved to the champagne flutes Jessica had poured earlier, downing hers in one gulp. "To new beginnings, right?" The phrase carried an odd weight, and Valerie found herself studying her sister's face. Emma had always been the more dramatic of the two, prone to grand gestures and emotional outbursts that their parents had alternately indulged and worried over. But this felt different. There was a calculated quality to her cheer that made Valerie's wedding dress suddenly feel too tight. "Maybe ease up on the champagne until after the ceremony?" Valerie suggested gently. Emma's laugh came out sharp. "Oh, Val. Always the responsible one. Always looking out for everyone. What would we do without you keeping us all in line?" The words stung, though Valerie couldn't pinpoint exactly why. She'd spent years trying to be the bridge between her parents and Emma, the peacekeeper who smoothed over every family gathering and crisis. It was exhausting, but someone had to do it. "Emma," Linda's voice carried a warning note. "Why don't you go check on your father? Make sure he has his boutonniere pinned properly." Emma's smile became brittle. "Of course. Can't have Robert Cox looking anything less than perfect for his golden daughter's wedding." She swept from the room before anyone could respond, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken concerns. "She's just nervous," Linda said quickly, though her hands were shaking now as she adjusted Valerie's veil. "You know how she gets at big family events." Valerie did know. Emma had a pattern of creating small dramas whenever she felt overshadowed. Forgotten birthdays that suddenly became major crises. Illnesses that materialized whenever Valerie had good news to share. But this felt bigger somehow, more deliberate. "Mom," Valerie said carefully, "is there something I should know about Emma? Has she been—" "Everything's fine," Linda cut her off with the tone that had ended countless conversations over the years. "Today is about you and David. Let's focus on that." An hour later, Valerie stood at the back of the chapel, her arm linked through her father's. Robert Cox cut an impressive figure in his tuxedo, his silver hair combed back, and his charm turned up to its usual wattage. At 62, he still possessed the magnetism that had built his successful consulting firm, though Valerie sometimes wondered if the constant performance exhausted him as much as it did everyone else. "You look radiant, sweetheart," he murmured as the processional music began. "David's a lucky man." Valerie squeezed his arm, grateful for this moment of genuine connection. Whatever flaws her father had, and there had been many over the years, he'd always made her feel treasured. "Thanks, Dad." As they began their walk down the aisle, Valerie tried to focus on David waiting for her at the altar, his face lit with joy and love. This was what mattered, not Emma's strange mood or her mother's nervous energy, or the subtle tensions that always seemed to simmer beneath the surface at Cox family gatherings. This was about the future she and David were building together. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of perfect moments. David's vows brought tears to her eyes as he spoke about trust being the foundation of everything they'd build together, about honesty being the cornerstone of their love. When she spoke her own vows, promising to be his partner in all things, she meant every word, with a fierce intensity that surprised her. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced, and as David's lips met hers, Valerie felt a surge of pure happiness. This was what she'd worked so hard for, this moment of perfect unity, with everyone she loved gathered to witness their joy. The reception began seamlessly, exactly as she'd planned it. The country club's ballroom had been transformed with white flowers and soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of elegant celebration. She and David made their grand entrance to applause and cheers, and for the first time all day, Valerie allowed herself to relax. The traditional toasts began after dinner. David's best friend spoke eloquently about their college friendship and how Valerie had brought out the best in David. Jessica's maid of honor speech was perfect. Funny without being embarrassing, heartfelt without being sentimental. As Jessica finished and handed the microphone back to the DJ, Valerie settled into David's arms, ready to enjoy the rest of their perfect evening. But then Emma appeared at the DJ's station, her her smile brilliant as she gestured for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma's voice rang out over the sound system, immediately commanding attention. "I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment. As the sister of the bride, I have something very special to share with all of you tonight." Valerie felt David's arms tighten around her slightly. This hadn't been planned. Emma had never asked to speak, despite what Linda had said earlier. But her sister was already speaking, her voice carrying that strange, bright quality from the morning. "Valerie has always been the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect everything," Emma continued, her words carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "And now she has the perfect husband and the perfect wedding. But I think it's time everyone knew just how perfect our family really is." Something cold crawled up Valerie's spine. Around them, she could sense the guests' attention focusing with uncomfortable intensity. This wasn't going to be a normal toast. She could feel it in the way Emma held herself, in the glitter of her eyes under the ballroom lights. "Emma," she whispered, but her sister was already continuing, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "You see, there's something I've been keeping secret, something I couldn't share until tonight. But now, surrounded by all of you wonderful people celebrating love and new beginnings, I feel like the truth needs to come out." The ballroom had gone completely silent now, 150 guests hanging on Emma's every word. Valerie tried to catch her sister's eye, to somehow signal her to stop, but Emma was staring directly at David now, her smile taking on a quality that made Valerie's blood turn to ice. "The truth is," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "David and I are going to have a baby." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Gasps echoed from the assembled guests, followed by a silence so complete that Valerie could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She felt David go rigid beside her, his sharp intake of breath cutting through the shocked quiet like a blade. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not at her perfect wedding. With everyone watching. With her entire world suddenly tilting off its axis. But Emma wasn't finished. She was still holding the microphone, still smiling that terrible bright smile, and when she spoke again, her words would shatter everything Valerie had ever believed about her family, her marriage, and herself. Emma's words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every corner of the ballroom. The silence stretched impossibly long, broken only by the soft clink of someone setting down a champagne glass with trembling hands. Valerie felt the world tilt sideways, her perfect wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume in someone else's nightmare. "I know this comes as a shock," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the chaos she'd just unleashed. "But David and I, well, love doesn't follow timelines, does it?" She let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "We've been seeing each other for months. Those late nights at the office, those weekend conferences. We found something neither of us expected." Valerie's vision blurred at the edges. She could feel David's body next to hers, rigid with shock, but she couldn't turn to look at him. Couldn't bear to see guilt or confirmation in his eyes. Around them, guests shifted uncomfortably, some craning their necks to get a better view of the unfolding disaster, others staring down at their plates as if they could disappear into the tablecloths. "Emma, stop," Valerie finally managed to whisper, but her sister was beyond stopping now. "I'm 3 months along," Emma announced, one hand drifting to her still flat stomach with theatrical precision. "The baby is due in February, David's baby." Her eyes found Valerie's across the room, and there was something triumphant in her gaze, something that made Valerie's knees go weak. "I wanted to tell you privately, Val, but you've been so busy with wedding plans, so focused on your perfect day. And tonight, surrounded by all this love and celebration, it felt like the right time to share our news." The murmurs started then, a low buzz of shocked whispers that filled the ballroom like static. Valerie caught fragments. "Can you believe? Poor Valerie. How long has this been? Did you see David's face? David." She forced herself to turn toward her husband. God, they'd been married for less than 6 hours, and saw him staring at Emma with an expression of pure horror and confusion. "That's not," he started, his voice cracking. Emma, what are you? This isn't true. None of this is true. But his denial sounded weak even to Valerie's ears, lost in the enormity of Emma's accusation. She watched as doubt crept across the faces of their guests. David was a quiet man, sometimes awkward at social gatherings. His shocked stammering could easily be mistaken for guilt. David! Emma's voice carried a note of wounded surprise that was Academy Award worthy. I know this isn't how we planned to tell everyone, but we can't keep pretending anymore. The baby deserves better than secrets. Linda Cox had gone paper white, one hand pressed to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Robert stood frozen beside her, his usual charm completely abandoned as he stared at his younger daughter with growing horror. Jessica was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward Valerie with the determined expression of someone ready for battle. I need to sit down, Valerie heard herself say, though her voice sounded strange and distant. The room was spinning now, faces blurring together in a kaleidoscope of shock and pity and barely concealed excitement at being witness to such spectacular drama. Of course, sweetheart, David said, his arm coming around her waist to support her. The endearment felt wrong now, tainted by Emma's words. How could he touch her so tenderly when everyone in the room was wondering if he'd been touching her sister the same way? Emma finally released the microphone, but the damage was done. The elegant reception Valerie had planned so carefully had transformed into something else entirely, a public execution disguised as a celebration. Guests were whispering behind hands, phones already appearing as some began to text or call others who weren't there. By morning, this story would be everywhere. Jessica reached them first, her forensic accountant's mind already working. We need to get you out of here, she said quietly, her voice cutting through Valerie's shock. Now. But before they could move, Emma was there, approaching with the same radiant smile she'd worn all day, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of her sister's wedding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Val, I'm so sorry, she said, reaching out as if to embrace her. I know the timing isn't ideal, but don't. The word came out harder than Valerie intended, stopping Emma in her tracks. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. Emma's face crumpled with what looked like genuine hurt, but Valerie could see the calculation behind her sister's green eyes. This was performance, all of it. The tears threatening to spill, the trembling lower lip, the way she wrapped her arms around herself as if she were the one who needed protection. I never meant for it to happen this way, Emma whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. We tried to fight it, David and I, but some things are bigger than we are. David made a sound like a wounded animal. Emma, please, you know this isn't. You're lying. Why are you doing this? The desperation in his voice should have convinced Valerie of his innocence. Should have. But Emma's performance was so convincing, so detailed. She knew things about David's schedule, about his work habits. How else would she know about his late nights at the office? Unless... We need to go, Jessica said again, more urgently this time. She'd positioned herself between Valerie and the growing crowd of onlookers, her protective instincts in full force. Val, we need to leave. Now. Valerie nodded numbly, allowing Jessica and David to guide her toward the exit. Behind them, she could hear the escalating murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs as guests stood to get a better view, the sharp click of high heels as some of the more socially ambitious guests moved closer to where Emma still stood, now surrounded by Linda and Robert, and looking every inch the wronged woman rather than the destroyer of lives. As they reached the ballroom doors, Valerie caught sight of herself in the ornate mirrors that lined the walls. Her face was chalk white against the ivory of her gown, her carefully styled hair already coming loose from its pins. She looked like a ghost haunting her own wedding reception. The elevator ride to the bridal suite passed in silence. But Valerie could feel David's eyes on her, could sense his need to explain, to defend himself. She wasn't ready to hear it, wasn't ready to figure out whether she believed him or not. Because the terrible truth was that a part of her, a small, treacherous part buried deep beneath years of making excuses for Emma's behavior, wasn't entirely surprised. Emma had always been jealous of Valerie's relationships, had always found ways to insert herself into situations where she felt overlooked. But this was beyond anything Valerie had imagined possible. As Jessica unlocked the bridal suite door, Valerie took one last look down the hallway toward the ballroom, where her perfect wedding had just become her worst nightmare. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what was true and what was lies. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether her marriage was worth fighting for, or if Emma had already destroyed it beyond repair. But tonight, all she could do was close the door on the wreckage and try to breathe through the pain of watching her family destroy itself once again. Valerie woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and for one blissful moment, she forgot. Then memory crashed over her like ice water. Emma's voice echoing through the ballroom, the gasps of their guests, David's stricken face. She was in the honeymoon suite at the country club, still wearing her slip from the night before, her wedding dress hanging like a ghost in the corner. David sat in the armchair by the window, fully dressed, his phone clutched in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "How many?" Valerie asked, her voice hoarse. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages. David's voice was flat, exhausted. "My office, your office, both our families, half the wedding party." He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Val, we need to talk about what happened last night." Before she could respond, her own phone buzzed on the nightstand. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and Valerie grabbed it gratefully. "Thank God you're awake." Jessica's voice was crisp, professional, her crisis management mode. "I'm in the lobby with coffee and damage control. Can I come up?" "Please." Jessica arrived within minutes, carrying a cardboard tray of coffee and wearing the expression of someone ready for war. She'd changed out of her bridesmaid dress into jeans and a blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. "Okay," Jessica said, setting the coffee on the small table. "I've been up since 5 doing research. We need to treat this like any other investigation, methodically, with evidence, not emotion." Valerie accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "What did you find?" "Inconsistencies," Jessica said, pulling out her tablet. "Emma's story doesn't add up, Val. The timeline she gave last night? It doesn't work." David leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the disaster began. "What do you mean? She claimed you've been having an affair for months, right? Late nights at the office, weekend conferences." Jessica pulled up a document on her screen. "I have access to your calendar through the wedding planning, remember? David, you worked late exactly 3 times in the past 6 months, and Emma wasn't even in town for 2 of those." Valerie felt something loosen in her chest. "And the conferences?" "1 conference, in Chicago. I called the hotel this morning. David was registered in a single room, and his keycard records show he never left the hotel except for conference events." Jessica's fingers flew across the tablet. Plus, Emma posted Instagram stories that same weekend from a spa retreat in the Berkshires with her friend Melissa. David's relief was palpable. "You documented all of this?" "I'm a forensic accountant, David. Documentation is what I do." Jessica's tone softened slightly. "But we need more than timeline inconsistencies. We need to understand why she's doing this." Valerie's phone rang again. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, she answered. "Valerie, sweetheart, we need to talk." Linda's voice was strained, artificial. "Can you come to the house? Your father and I think it's best if we handle this as a family." "Handle what, Mom? Emma's lies?" A pause. "Valerie, I know you're upset, but accusing your sister of lying about something this serious, are you defending her?" The words came out sharper than Valerie intended. "She destroyed my wedding, made horrific accusations about my husband, and you want to, quote, handle it as a family? Emma is fragile right now. She's going through a difficult time." "What kind of difficult time?" Valerie pressed. "What aren't you telling me?" Another pause. Longer this time. Just come to the house. Please. The line went dead. Valerie stared at the phone, anger building in her chest. Even now, even after what Emma had done, their mother was making excuses. We're going to my parents' house, Valerie announced. Together, David said firmly. Whatever we're walking into, we face it together. An hour later, they stood on the familiar porch of the Cox family home in Westport. The colonial where Valerie had grown up looked the same as always. Perfectly manicured lawn, seasonal flowers arranged with artistic precision, the picture of suburban success. But today it felt ominous, like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. Linda opened the door before they could knock, her face pale but determined. She was dressed impeccably as always, but Valerie noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided making direct eye contact. "Thank you for coming," Linda said stiffly. "Your father is in his study with Emma." They followed her through the house, past family photos that now felt like evidence of some elaborate deception. In Robert's study, Emma sat curled in the leather chair by the fireplace, looking young and vulnerable in an oversized sweater. Their father stood behind his desk like a CEO, preparing for a hostile board meeting. "Valerie," Robert said, his voice carrying its usual authority, "I think we need to discuss how to move forward from this unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate situation?" Valerie's voice rose. "Emma accused my husband of adultery and pregnancy in front of 150 people. That's not unfortunate. That's character assassination." Emma looked up then, her green eyes swimming with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, Val, but I couldn't keep lying. The baby deserves—" "What baby?" Jessica interrupted, stepping forward with her tablet. "Because I've been looking into this, Emma, and your story has more holes than Swiss cheese." Emma's face flushed. "You had no right to investigate my private life." "You made it public when you destroyed my best friend's wedding," Jessica shot back. "Now, let's start with the timeline. You claim you and David have been having an affair for months, but—" "Jessica," Robert's voice cut through the growing tension. "I appreciate your loyalty to Valerie, but family matters should be handled by family." "Then handle it," Valerie said, her voice deadly quiet. "Tell me the truth about what's going on with Emma. Because this isn't just about David and me anymore. This is about our family's pattern of secrets and lies." Linda and Robert exchanged a look. The same careful, calculated glance Valerie had seen thousands of times growing up whenever difficult topics arose. The look that meant there were things she wasn't supposed to know, problems that weren't suitable for discussion. "Emma has been under a lot of stress lately," Linda began carefully. "What kind of stress?" David asked. Emma stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here. Stop treating me like I'm some fragile child who can't handle reality." "Then tell us what reality is," Valerie said. "Because from where I'm standing, you deliberately sabotaged my wedding with a lie designed to destroy my marriage. I want to know why." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. Emma stared at her sister with an expression that mixed desperation with something darker, something that looked almost like hatred. "You really want to know why?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "You want to know what this perfect family is really built on?" "Emma, don't!" Linda started, but Emma was already speaking, her words spilling out like water through a broken dam. "Fine, let's talk about reality. Let's talk about the DNA tests I demanded 3 months ago. The ones that proved what I've suspected my entire life." Valerie felt the world shift beneath her feet once again. "What DNA tests?" Emma's smile was bitter, triumphant. "The ones that proved Robert Cox isn't my father." The words hung in the air like a detonated bomb, leaving everyone frozen in its aftermath. Valerie felt her legs give way slightly, and David's hand immediately found her elbow, steadying her. Robert's face had gone ashen, while Linda looked like she might be sick. "That's not," Robert started, but Emma cut him off with a laugh that bordered on hysterical. "Not what, Dad? Not true? Not supposed to be discussed in polite company?" Emma's voice dripped with years of suppressed rage. "I've spent my entire life feeling like an outsider in this family, and now I know why. Because I am one." Emma, please, Linda whispered, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. This isn't the time or place. When exactly would be the right time, Mother? When would it be convenient for you to acknowledge that your perfect family is built on lies? Emma turned to Valerie, her eyes blazing. Did you know? Did you know that everything we've been told about our family is fiction? Valerie's mind reeled, trying to process this new revelation alongside the devastation from the night before. I don't understand. What DNA tests? When did you... 3 months ago, Emma said, pacing now like a caged animal. Right after I lost my job. Right after Marcus left me. Right after my entire life fell apart, and I had nowhere to turn except this family that's never really felt like mine. Jessica stepped forward, her investigative instincts kicking in. Emma, you said you lost your job. What happened? Emma's laugh was bitter. Oh, that. I was fired for, quote, inappropriate conduct and violation of client confidentiality. Apparently, using company resources to investigate your own family history is frowned upon in the corporate world. The pieces began clicking together in Valerie's mind with horrible clarity. You used your position at the marketing firm to run background checks. On our family. Smart girl, Emma said, her tone mocking. Always the clever one. Always the one who figured things out first. Except you never figured out the biggest secret of all, did you? Robert finally found his voice. Emma, that's enough. Whatever you think you've discovered. Think I've discovered? Emma whirled on him, her composure completely shattered now. I have DNA evidence, Robert. Scientific proof that you're not my biological father. That means someone else is. Someone Mom was sleeping with while she was married to you. Linda made a sound like a wounded animal, sinking into the nearest chair. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face, and for the first time in Valerie's memory, her mother looked every one of her 55 years. This is why you destroyed my wedding? Valerie's voice was barely above a whisper. Because you found out about an affair that happened 25 years ago? Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained hard. You still don't get it, do you? It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies. It was about being treated like a mistake my entire life, while you got to be the golden child. It was about finally understanding why nothing I ever did was good enough. David spoke for the first time since Emma's revelation. But why involve me? Why make up a pregnancy? Why destroy Valerie's wedding? What did any of that have to do with your parentage? Emma's smile turned cruel. Because I wanted her to know what it felt like. I wanted perfect Valerie to experience what it's like when your entire world is revealed to be a lie. I wanted her to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the complete destruction of everything she believed in. You're sick, Valerie breathed. You're actually sick. Maybe I am, Emma shot back. Maybe 25 years of being the family's secret will do that to a person. Jessica had been quietly taking notes on her tablet throughout the exchange. Now she looked up, her expression grim. Emma, you said Marcus left you. Marcus Rivera? Your boyfriend from college? Emma's face flickered with something that might have been pain. Ex-boyfriend. He couldn't handle my issues. What kind of issues? Jessica pressed. Does it matter? Emma's voice was growing more erratic. He's gone, the job is gone, and now everyone knows what a disaster I am. Mission accomplished. Valerie studied her sister's face, seeing for the first time the depth of the damage beneath Emma's beautiful exterior. The manic energy, the calculated cruelty of the night before, the way she'd been drinking champagne like water, it all painted a picture of someone in serious psychological distress. Emma, Valerie said carefully, have you been getting help? Professional help? You mean therapy? Emma's laugh was hollow. Oh, I tried that. 3 different therapists in the past year. Funny thing about therapy. It only works if you can trust the people in your life to tell you the truth. Hard to do when your entire family foundation is built on deception. Linda finally spoke, her voice barely audible. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? Emma's voice cracked. From what? From knowing who I really am? From understanding why I never fit? You didn't protect me. You isolated me. You made me an outsider in my own family and then acted like it was my fault when I couldn't find my place. Robert cleared his throat, his businessman's composure struggling to reassert itself. This is getting us nowhere. What's done is done. We need to focus on managing the situation moving forward. Managing the situation? Valerie turned on her father with fury she'd never felt before. Is that what you call it? Emma just admitted to deliberately destroying my wedding out of revenge, and you want to manage it? Valerie, please try to understand. No. The word came out with surprising force. I'm done understanding. I'm done making excuses for everyone else's bad behavior. I'm done being the family peacekeeper while you all lie to each other and to me. She turned to Emma, who was watching the confrontation with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something that might have been fear. You want to know what I understand, Emma? I understand that you've been hurt, and I'm sorry for that. But what you did last night wasn't about healing or truth or justice. It was about making sure that if you couldn't be happy, then no one else could be either. Emma's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the little sister Valerie remembered, lost, vulnerable, desperate for love and acceptance. I never meant for it to go this far, Emma whispered. I wanted someone to pay attention. I wanted someone to care that I was falling apart. Then you should have asked for help, Valerie said, her voice gentle but firm. You should have told us what you were going through instead of trying to destroy everything good in revenge for something that happened before you were even born. The silence that followed was heavy with 25 years of unspoken truths, buried resentments, and carefully maintained lies. Outside, Valerie could hear the normal sounds of suburban life continuing, lawnmowers, children playing, the distant hum of traffic. The world was going on as if nothing had changed, while inside this house, everything they'd believed about their family was crumbling. Jessica looked up from her tablet. There's something else we need to discuss. Emma, the DNA test results. Do you still have them? Emma nodded mutely. Because if we're going to move forward from this, if there's any hope of healing, we need to know the whole truth. All of it. The 3 days that followed felt like an eternity compressed into moments. Valerie had insisted on immediate DNA testing, not just to prove David's innocence regarding Emma's fabricated pregnancy, but to verify Emma's claims about her own parentage. The waiting was excruciating, filled with sleepless nights and conversations that went in circles, each family member retreating into their own version of defensive silence. On Wednesday morning, exactly 72 hours after the wedding disaster, Marcus Rivera stood at the Cox family's front door with a courier bag and an expression that suggested he delivered his share of life-altering news. Mrs. Park? He said when Valerie answered the door. She still startled at her married name, though after 3 days of hell, her wedding felt like something that had happened to someone else. Yes. Marcus was a compact man in his 40s, with kind eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much of life's complexities. I have the results you requested. Expedited processing. He glanced past her to where the rest of the family had gathered in the living room. Would you like me to explain the findings or? Just give them to me, Valerie said, her voice steadier than she felt. She took the sealed envelope with hands that trembled only slightly. Behind her, she could feel the weight of everyone's attention. David's hopeful anxiety, Emma's brittle defiance, her parents' carefully maintained composure that couldn't quite hide their fear. There are actually 2 sets of results, Marcus said gently. The paternity test you requested, and the pregnancy verification. He paused, studying Valerie's face with professional compassion. Ma'am, in my line of work, I've learned to read between the lines. Whatever's happening in your family, I want you to know that the truth, however difficult, is usually better than living with lies. Valerie nodded, unable to speak. Marcus touched his cap respectfully and left, his presence having somehow made the moment feel more official, more final. Back in the living room, the envelope felt heavy as lead in her hands. Emma sat in the same chair she'd occupied for the past 3 days, looking smaller somehow, as if the waiting had diminished her. David stood behind Valerie, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Well," Robert said finally, his voice carrying the authority he used in boardrooms, though it couldn't quite mask his anxiety. Valerie tore open the envelope and pulled out 2 separate reports. She read the first one quickly, relief flooding through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "David," she said, turning to face her husband, "the pregnancy test is negative." Not just negative. There's no evidence Emma was ever pregnant at all. The silence that followed was deafening. David's exhale was audible, a sound of pure relief that had been building for 3 days, but Emma's reaction was what made everyone's blood run cold. She began to laugh. It started as a giggle, almost childlike, but quickly escalated into something that bordered on hysteria. "Of course it's negative," she managed between gasps of laughter. "Of course there's no baby. Did you really think I was stupid enough to actually get pregnant just to make a point?" "You lied," Valerie said, the words coming out flat and emotionless. "You stood up at my wedding and told a room full of people that you were carrying my husband's child, and it was all a lie." "Every word," Emma confirmed, her laughter finally subsiding into something more chilling, a calm, almost satisfied smile. "I planned it for months, Val. I researched David's schedule, learned his habits, figured out exactly what details would make the story believable. I even practiced the speech." Linda made a sound like she'd been slapped. "Emma, how could I, what, Mother? How could I finally fight back? How could I make sure that for once in my life, someone else felt what it was like to have their perfect world destroyed?" Valerie looked down at the second report, her hands shaking now. "The paternity test," she said quietly. "Emma, this confirms what you said. Robert isn't your biological father." The admission hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Robert's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "I suspected," he said quietly. "For years I suspected. But I never wanted to know for certain." "Who?" Valerie asked, looking between her parents. "If Robert isn't Emma's father, then who is?" Linda's composure finally shattered completely. "It doesn't matter now," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It was so long ago, and he's gone now." "It matters to me," Emma said, her voice deadly quiet. "It matters because I've spent my entire life wondering why I never fit, why I always felt like an outsider, why nothing I did was ever good enough." "You were loved," Linda said desperately. "You were wanted. We raised you as our own." "But I wasn't your own, was I?" Emma's voice cracked. "I was the product of your affair, the living reminder of your betrayal, the mistake you had to incorporate into your perfect family narrative." The truth hit Valerie like a physical blow. "That's why you did this. That's why you destroyed my wedding. You wanted me to feel what it was like to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely." Emma nodded, tears finally beginning to fall. "I wanted you to know what it felt like when everything you believed about your life turned out to be a lie. I wanted you to experience the humiliation, the doubt, the way everyone looks at you differently once they know your family's dirty secrets." "But David never betrayed me," Valerie said. "You made that up." "Details," Emma said with a shrug that didn't quite hide her trembling. "The point was the feeling. The point was making you understand what I've lived with my entire life." David spoke for the first time since the results were read. "Emma, what you've lived with isn't Valerie's fault. She didn't know about the affair. She didn't know about your parentage. You punished her for something she had nothing to do with." "She had everything to do with it," Emma exploded, jumping to her feet. "She was the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one who got all the love and attention while I got the scraps. Do you know what it's like to grow up feeling like you're constantly competing for affection in your own family and never understanding why you always lose?" Marcus Rivera's words echoed in Valerie's mind. The truth, however difficult, is usually better than living with lies. But looking at her sister's tear-streaked face, at her parents' shame and devastation, at the wreckage of what had once been a family, Valerie wondered if some truths were too destructive to bear. "Emma," she said quietly, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you felt unloved. I'm sorry you carried this burden alone. I'm sorry our parents' mistakes made you feel like an outsider. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I'm not sorry you're my sister. Regardless of biology, regardless of the circumstances of your birth, you're my sister. That was never a lie. Emma's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the lost little girl Valerie remembered from their childhood. Always trying harder, always needing more reassurance, always slightly apart from the rest of them, in ways no one had understood. I destroyed everything, Emma whispered. I can't take it back. No, Valerie agreed. You can't, but we can decide what we do next. The question hung in the air. Whether this family, built on decades of secrets, and now shattered by revenge and revelation, could find a way to rebuild itself on something more honest, more real, and ultimately more sustainable than the beautiful lies they'd been living with for so long. The silence following Emma's breakdown stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap under the weight of decades of unspoken truths. Valerie found herself studying her parents' faces, really looking at them for perhaps the first time in her adult life. The elegant composure, the careful deflections, the way difficult conversations always seemed to end before they really began. How had she never seen the elaborate performance for what it was? Sit down, Valerie said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. Both of you, we're going to have the conversation we should have had 25 years ago. Linda and Robert exchanged that familiar glance, the one that had preceded every family crisis, every uncomfortable moment that needed to be managed rather than addressed. But this time Valerie wouldn't allow it. No, she said sharply. No more silent communication. No more managing the situation. Emma just destroyed my wedding because she's been living with the consequences of your lies her entire life. The least you can do is explain how we got here. Robert cleared his throat, his businessman's instinct to control the narrative kicking in. Valerie, I understand you're upset, but this is complicated. Then uncomplicate it, David interjected, speaking up for the first time with real force. Because I just spent 3 days being accused of adultery and pregnancy fraud in front of everyone we know. I think I've earned the right to understand why. Linda sank onto the sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. It was 1998, she said quietly. You were 3, Valerie. I was pregnant with Emma, and your father was... She glanced at Robert, who was staring out the window as if he could escape through it. I was working too much, Robert said finally. The business was expanding, I was traveling constantly, and Linda was having a difficult pregnancy. The doctor had put her on bed rest. And you decided that gave you permission to have an affair? Valerie's voice was incredulous. I didn't decide anything, Robert snapped, his composure cracking. It just happened. Sarah was my assistant at the time, and she was there when Linda couldn't be. Sarah Mitchell, Linda whispered, and Valerie felt the blood drain from her face. Dr. Sarah Mitchell? The family therapist Emma mentioned wanting to see? Jessica had been quietly taking notes, but now she looked up with sharp attention. That can't be a coincidence. Emma's laugh was hollow. It's not. I've been researching our family for months, remember? Dr. Mitchell is Emma's biological mother. She's also the therapist who specializes in family secrets and trauma. Ironic, isn't it? The room spun around Valerie as the implications sank in. You knew, she said, staring at her parents. When Emma mentioned wanting to see Dr. Mitchell, you both knew exactly who she was. We thought it was a coincidence at first, Linda said, her voice barely audible. Sarah remarried years ago, changed her name back, but when Emma started talking about her specifically, you realized Emma had figured it out, David finished. That's why you've been so protective, so worried about her mental state. You knew she was close to discovering the truth. Robert finally turned away from the window, his face haggard. Sarah died 2 years ago. Cancer. She never tried to contact Emma, never interfered with our family. She kept her promise. What promise? Valerie demanded. That she would disappear, Linda said, tears streaming down her face. When I found out about the affair, when I realized I might be pregnant with another man's child, I gave Robert an ultimatum. He could choose his family or he could choose her, but he couldn't have both. And he chose family, Emma said bitterly. How noble. He chose you, Linda said fiercely, looking at Emma with more emotion than Valerie had seen from her in years. We both did. We could have. There were options. But we wanted you. We wanted our family to stay together. By building it on a lie, Valerie said. The anger was building in her chest now, hot and righteous. You stayed together for appearances, didn't you? For the perfect family image. And Emma paid the price her entire life. We tried to love her the same, Robert said desperately. We tried to treat both of you equally. But you couldn't, Emma said, her voice flat. Because every time you looked at me, you saw your mistake. Your betrayal. Your failure. She turned to Linda with eyes full of pain. And you, Mother, you tried so hard to overcompensate that you made it obvious something was different. The way you protected me, defended me, made excuses for my behavior. You treated me like damaged goods from day one. Linda's sobs were the only sound in the room for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her words were barely intelligible. I loved you. I love you still. You have to believe that. I believe you tried, Emma said sadly. But love isn't enough when it's built on guilt and shame and the constant fear that the truth will come out. Valerie found herself thinking about her childhood with new eyes. Emma's behavioral problems that their parents had always attributed to being, quote, sensitive. The way family conversations stopped when Emma entered the room. The careful way everyone always spoke around certain topics. The special attention Emma received that had always seemed like favoritism to outsiders, but now revealed itself as something more complex, parental guilt manifesting as overprotection. How long have you known for certain? She asked her parents. We've suspected since Emma was born, Robert admitted, but we never did a test. We were afraid of what we might find. So you let her grow up feeling like an outsider in her own family rather than risk confirming what you already knew, David said, his voice filled with disgust. We thought it was better if she never knew, Linda said desperately. We thought we could make it work, make her feel loved and secure without ever having to explain, without ever having to face what you'd done, Valerie corrected. You thought you could manage the situation instead of dealing with the truth. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where Robert had been standing. Do you want to know the worst part? She said, her voice eerily calm. It wasn't the not knowing that destroyed me. It was the knowing without being able to prove it. It was growing up with this constant feeling that something was wrong, that I didn't belong, that there was some secret everyone else was in on except me. She turned back to face the room, and Valerie was struck by how much her sister looked like their father in that moment. The same determined jaw, the same way of holding herself when preparing for battle. I used to lie awake at night wondering what I'd done wrong, Emma continued. Why Valerie got the easy relationship with both of you while I had to fight for every scrap of attention. Why nothing I accomplished was ever quite enough. Why I always felt like I was auditioning for my place in this family instead of just belonging to it. Emma, Linda started, but Emma held up a hand. I'm not finished. When I finally got the DNA results, do you know what I felt? Relief. Finally I had an explanation for why I'd never fit. But that relief lasted about 5 minutes before the rage set in. 25 years of my life wasted feeling inadequate and broken, when the truth was that this family was inadequate and broken long before I was ever born. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, Valerie could hear the normal sounds of suburban life continuing, a dog barking, a car starting, the distant sound of children playing, the world going on as if the Cox family hadn't just imploded in their perfectly appointed living room. So what now? Valerie asked finally. Where do we go from here? I don't know, Emma said honestly. I don't know if there is a here anymore. I think I might have destroyed that along with everything else. The days following the revelation felt like living in the aftermath of an earthquake. The foundation of everything Valerie had believed about her family had cracked, and the aftershocks kept coming. She found herself unable to sleep in the honeymoon suite they'd extended at the country club, staring at the ceiling while David tossed restlessly beside her, both of them processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. By Friday morning, the story had spread beyond their immediate circle. Social media posts from wedding guests had been screenshot and shared. Local news outlets had picked up whispers of the scandal. Wedding reception ends in family drama, and DNA results expose decades of family secrets, appeared in her Google alerts alongside sympathy cards from acquaintances and crude speculation from strangers. Emma had disappeared entirely, not returning calls or texts, her apartment dark whenever Valerie drove by. Linda had retreated into what she called managing the situation, fielding calls from concerned relatives, scheduling damage control meetings, and acting as if this were a public relations crisis rather than the complete breakdown of their family structure. Robert, meanwhile, had thrown himself into work with the manic energy of someone avoiding an inevitable reckoning. "I can't do this anymore," Valerie said to David over breakfast in their hotel room. "I can't pretend this is fixable with phone calls and meetings and proper management." David looked up from his untouched coffee, dark circles under his eyes making him look older than his 32 years. "What do you want to do?" "I want to be angry," Valerie said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I want to be furious with Emma for what she did to us, furious with my parents for creating the situation that made her desperate enough to do it, and furious with myself for being so blind to all of it." "You're allowed to be angry, Val. What Emma did was inexcusable, regardless of her reasons. But that's just it. I can't stay angry at her. Every time I think about her standing up at our wedding and destroying everything, I remember her face when she admitted she'd never felt like she belonged in our family. How do you hate someone for acting out of that much pain?" David reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to choose between anger and compassion. You can feel both." "Can I? Because right now it feels like I have to pick sides. Either Emma is the victim of our parents' lies and deserves understanding, or she's the villain who destroyed our wedding out of jealousy and revenge. I can't figure out how to hold both truths at the same time." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Jessica stood in the hallway, her expression grim and her tablet clutched against her chest. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "I've been digging deeper into Emma's recent activities, and there are things you need to know." She settled into the chair by the window, her forensic accountant's demeanor fully engaged. "Emma's been spiraling for longer than any of us realized. The job loss was just the beginning. She's been engaging in increasingly destructive behavior for months." "What kind of behavior?" Valerie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Financial recklessness. She's maxed out 3 credit cards, taken cash advances, borrowed money from friends she hasn't paid back. She's been drinking heavily, not just at social events, but daily. And Marcus Rivera wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her fiancé." Valerie felt the blood drain from her face. "Fiancé?" "They were supposed to get married in September. He broke off the engagement 6 weeks ago when he found out about the DNA testing and her increasing obsession with what she called, quote, family justice. He tried to get her into therapy, but she refused." David leaned forward. "Jessica, what are you saying?" "I'm saying Emma's not just hurt and angry. She's having what looks like a complete psychological breakdown, and we've all been so focused on the family drama that we missed the warning signs." The implications hit Valerie like a physical blow. While she'd been planning her perfect wedding, her sister had been falling apart. While she'd been focused on creating one beautiful day of family harmony, Emma had been drowning in decades of unresolved pain and identity confusion. "Where is she now?" Valerie asked. "That's the problem. No one knows. She hasn't been back to her apartment, hasn't answered calls from any of her friends. Linda thinks she's just taking space to process, but Marcus is worried. He called me this morning." "Worried how?" Jessica's expression grew more serious. "He's concerned about her mental state. Some things she said before their breakup about not wanting to be a burden anymore, about everyone being better off without her. He thinks she might be having thoughts of self-harm." The room went silent except for the sound of Valerie's heart pounding in her ears. Whatever anger she'd been holding onto evaporated, replaced by cold terror. "We have to find her," she said, standing abruptly. "Val, maybe we should call the police. Or, this family has done enough damage to Emma through neglect and avoidance. I'm not going to abandon her now when she needs us most, regardless of what she did to our wedding." David stood as well, reaching for his jacket. "Where do we start?" "With the truth," Valerie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "All of it. No more family meetings and damage control. Emma was right about one thing. This family's foundation is built on lies and secrets. If we're going to save her, if we're going to save any of this, we need to start over with complete honesty." "Even if it destroys what's left?" Jessica asked. Valerie looked out the window at the Connecticut countryside, thinking about Emma alone somewhere, carrying 25 years of pain and confusion. What's left is already destroyed. The only question is whether we can build something real from the wreckage. The call came at 2 a.m. Valerie jerked awake to her phone, buzzing insistently on the nightstand, David stirring beside her. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer anyway. "Is this Valerie Cox?" The voice was professional but concerned, a woman who sounded like she dealt with crisis situations regularly. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Hartford Hospital. We have your sister Emma here. She was brought in by emergency services earlier tonight. She's asking for you." Valerie's blood turned to ice. "Is she... What happened?" "She's stable, but she's going to need support. Can you come in?" The drive to Hartford felt both endless and instantaneous. David's hands were steady on the wheel, while Valerie's mind raced through every worst-case scenario. By the time they reached the hospital, Jessica was already in the waiting room, having driven directly from her apartment after Valerie's frantic call. Emma looked smaller than Valerie had ever seen her, dwarfed by the hospital bed and connected to monitoring equipment. Her face was pale but alert, and when she saw Valerie enter the room, tears immediately began streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," were the first words out of Emma's mouth. "Val, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." Valerie sank into the chair beside the bed, taking in her sister's appearance. "What happened, Em?" "I took some pills. Not to die exactly, just to make everything stop for a while. But then I got scared and called 911. Emma's voice was hoarse, exhausted. The paramedic who responded, his name was Marcus too. Different Marcus. Made me think about my Marcus, about how he tried to help me and I pushed him away. Made me realize I'd pushed everyone away. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, a slight woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Cox, I'd like to speak with all of you about next steps, if that's all right." Over the next hour, Dr. Chen outlined the reality of Emma's situation with clinical precision tempered by genuine compassion. Depression, anxiety, identity issues compounded by family trauma, and what she termed maladaptive coping mechanisms that had been building for months. The good news is that Emma was honest with the intake team about her mental state and the circumstances that led to tonight, Dr. Chen explained. She wants help. That's the most important factor in recovery. "What kind of help?" David asked. "Intensive outpatient therapy to start, with the possibility of inpatient treatment if needed. But more importantly, family therapy. The issues Emma is dealing with can't be addressed in isolation. They're rooted in family dynamics that need to be examined and, where possible, healed." Valerie felt a familiar knot in her stomach. "My parents don't believe in therapy. They think family problems should be handled privately." "That's going to have to change," Dr. Chen said gently but firmly. Emma's crisis didn't happen in a vacuum. The family secrets, the patterns of communication, or lack thereof, the way difficult truths have been avoided rather than addressed. All of that contributed to bringing us to this point. Later, when they were alone, Emma reached for Valerie's hand with fingers that still trembled slightly. "I know what I did was unforgivable. Destroying your wedding, lying about David, trying to hurt you because I was hurting. There's no excuse for any of it." "You're right." Valerie said quietly. "There isn't an excuse. What you did was cruel and calculated, and it nearly destroyed my marriage before it even began." Emma flinched as if she'd been slapped, but Valerie continued. "But I also understand now that you were drowning, and drowning people sometimes pull others down with them. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human." "I don't know how to come back from this," Emma whispered. "I don't know how to face everyone after what I've done." "One day at a time," Valerie said, echoing words she'd heard in movies but never really understood until now. "With help. Real help. Not the family's version of sweeping problems under the rug." The conversation with their parents the next day was every bit as difficult as Valerie had anticipated. They met in Dr. Chen's office at the hospital, a neutral space where the usual family dynamics couldn't take hold quite as easily. "I don't understand why we need a stranger involved in our private affairs," Robert said, his businessman's discomfort with vulnerability evident in every line of his body. "Because our private affairs nearly killed your daughter," Valerie responded with a bluntness that surprised everyone, including herself. Linda had been silent through most of the session, but now she spoke up. "What do you want from us? How do we fix this?" Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Cox, fixing this isn't something that happens overnight. It's going to require all of you to examine patterns of behavior that have been in place for decades. It's going to mean having conversations you've been avoiding, acknowledging truths you've been hiding, and learning new ways to communicate with each other." "And if we don't?" Robert asked. "Then Emma will continue to struggle with the foundations of her identity, and your family will likely fragment permanently," Dr. Chen said matter-of-factly. "The choice is yours." The silence that followed was heavy, with decades of avoidance and the weight of consequences finally coming due. "What would it look like?" Linda asked finally. "This therapy. Weekly family sessions, individual sessions for each of you, and a commitment to honesty, even when it's uncomfortable," Dr. Chen explained. "Emma has already agreed to this process. She's willing to do the work to understand her actions and develop healthier coping mechanisms. The question is whether the rest of you are willing to do the same." Valerie looked around the room at her family. Emma pale and fragile but determined, her parents struggling with the idea of exposing their carefully maintained facades, David quietly supportive, but clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of what he'd married into. "I'm in," Valerie said. "Whatever it takes, I'm in." Emma's relief was visible, and one by one, the others agreed. It wasn't enthusiasm. It was resignation mixed with the faint hope that maybe, possibly, they could build something better from the ruins of what they'd been. "Good," Dr. Chen said, making notes in her file. "Let's start with honesty, complete honesty. About everything." 6 months after the wedding disaster, Valerie stood in the same bridal suite at the Fairfield Country Club, but everything was different. The ivory silk dress hanging in the corner was simpler this time, elegant but not elaborate, beautiful but not desperate for perfection. Through the tall windows, she could see the small gathering of guests below. 25 people instead of 150, family and closest friends only. Everyone who had witnessed both the destruction and the painstaking work of rebuilding that had followed. "You look beautiful," Jessica said from behind her, adjusting the simple pearl necklace, the same one from the first wedding. But now it felt like a bridge between who Valerie had been and who she was becoming. "I feel different," Valerie admitted, studying her reflection. The face looking back at her was calmer somehow, less desperate to control every detail. 6 months of family therapy had taught her the difference between perfectionism born of love and perfectionism born of fear. Different how? Stronger, more honest, less afraid of the truth. Valerie turned to face her friend. "The first time I got married, I was trying to fix everything with one perfect day. This time, I'm just celebrating what David and I have built together." A soft knock interrupted them, and Emma appeared in the doorway. The sight of her sister still caused a complex mix of emotions in Valerie's chest. Love, forgiveness, wariness, hope. But the sharp edge of anger had dulled with understanding and time. "Can I come in?" Emma asked, her voice tentative in a way that had become familiar over the past months. Therapy had taught her to ask for permission rather than assume her welcome, to respect boundaries she'd once bulldozed through without thought. Of course. Emma stepped into the room, and Valerie was struck by how much her sister had changed. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a quieter, more grounded presence. She'd gained some weight, healthy weight that filled out the hollows in her cheeks, and her eyes held a clarity that had been missing for years. "I wanted to give you this," Emma said, holding out a small wrapped box. Before the ceremony, Valerie accepted the gift cautiously. The past 6 months had been filled with small gestures from Emma, attempts at amends that sometimes felt genuine and sometimes felt like manipulation. Therapy had taught Valerie to appreciate the gesture while maintaining healthy skepticism about the motivation. Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of 2 interlocked circles. "It's not expensive," Emma said quickly, as if anticipating criticism. "I'm still paying off debt from before. But I saw it and thought of us. 2 separate circles that overlap but maintain their own shape. Dr. Mitchell helped me understand that's what healthy family relationships should look like." Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The irony of their family therapist sharing a name with Emma's biological mother had been too much for any of them to ignore. When they discovered the connection, a coincidence that felt more like fate, it had taken weeks of additional sessions to work through the complexity of the situation. But Dr. Mitchell had proven skillful at helping them separate the past from the present, the woman who had unknowingly contributed to their family's fracture from the woman who was helping them heal. "Thank you," Valerie said, and meant it. She fastened the bracelet around her wrist, noting how it complemented her grandmother's pearls rather than competing with them. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous," Emma admitted, "but good nervous. I'm honored that you wanted me here, after everything." The decision to include Emma in the vow renewal hadn't been easy. There had been long discussions in therapy about boundaries, forgiveness, and the difference between reconciliation and enablement. In the end, it had been David who suggested that excluding Emma would only perpetuate the family's pattern of dealing with uncomfortable truths through avoidance. "You're my sister," Valerie said simply. "That hasn't changed." "Even after what I did?" "Especially after what I did," Valerie corrected. "We know each other's worst now. That means whatever we build from here is based on reality instead of illusion." A few minutes later, they made their way downstairs together. The ceremony was being held in the club's garden rather than the grand ballroom, under a simple arch of white roses that Linda had arranged, her way of contributing while respecting Valerie's desire for simplicity. The guests rose as Valerie appeared, but there were no gasps of admiration or odd whispers about her appearance. Instead, there was something warmer, genuine affection from people who had watched her weather the storm and emerge stronger. David's eyes met hers across the garden, and his smile held everything they'd learned about each other in the past 6 months. That love could survive betrayal, that trust could be rebuilt, that choosing each other was a daily decision rather than a one-time declaration. Robert walked her down the aisle again, but this time his charm felt less performative and more genuine. 3 months of individual therapy had forced him to confront his pattern of emotional avoidance, and while he was still learning how to be present rather than managing situations, the effort was visible and appreciated. "Ready?" he asked as they paused at the beginning of the aisle. "This time, yes," Valerie replied. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Their vows were different this time, more honest about the challenges they'd faced, more realistic about the work that marriage required, more grateful for what they'd learned about each other's character under pressure. "I promise to choose you not just in the easy moments, but especially in the difficult ones," David said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to trust in what we've built together, even when outside forces try to tear it down. I promise to love you as you are, not as I think you should be," Valerie responded. "I promise to build our marriage on truth rather than perfection, on growth rather than control." When they kissed, the applause was warm but restrained, acknowledgement rather than celebration, recognition that this was not an ending but a new beginning. The reception that followed was held in the club's smaller dining room, intimate and comfortable rather than grand. Emma gave a toast that had been carefully crafted in therapy sessions, apologizing again for her actions while acknowledging the growth that had come from the crisis. 6 months ago, I tried to destroy something beautiful because I was in too much pain to appreciate beauty, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Today, I'm grateful to witness something even more beautiful, a love that survived my worst impulses and emerged stronger. Valerie and David, thank you for showing me that forgiveness is possible, that families can heal, and that the truth, however painful, is always better than the most beautiful lie. As the evening wound down, Valerie found herself on the garden terrace with her family. All of them, for the first time in months, in the same space without tension or undercurrents of unspoken resentments. I got my promotion, she told them, sharing news she'd been saving. Senior Vice President of Marketing. They said my crisis management skills were exactly what they needed. The laughter that followed was genuine, unforced. The kind of family moment Valerie had always tried to manufacture, but had never quite achieved until they'd stopped trying so hard to be perfect. What's next? Linda asked, and for once the question didn't feel loaded with expectations or hidden agendas. Living, Valerie said simply, just living. One honest day at a time. 1 year after the wedding crisis, Valerie sat in her home office reviewing the final draft of an article she'd been working on for months. The title read, When Family Secrets Explode, A Personal Journey Through Crisis and Healing. The piece would be published anonymously in a family therapy journal, but the experience of writing it had been profoundly cathartic, a way of transforming their pain into something that might help other families facing similar crossroads. Outside her window, she could see David in their small garden, planting bulbs for next spring. They'd bought the house in West Hartford 6 months ago, a compromise between staying close to family and creating their own space. It was smaller than what they'd originally planned, but it felt like home in a way their previous apartment never had. Maybe because it was chosen by people who knew exactly who they were and what they'd survived together. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Through the front window, she could see Emma standing on the porch, holding what appeared to be a small gift bag, and looking nervous despite the fact that these weekly visits had become routine. Come in, Valerie called, saving her work and closing the laptop. David's out back if you want to say hello. Emma had developed a tentative but genuine friendship with David over the past year, something that had surprised everyone, including the therapists. Perhaps because he'd been the innocent target of her deception, his forgiveness had meant more to Emma than anyone else's. Or perhaps because he understood what it felt like to be an outsider trying to find a place in the Cox family dynamics. Actually, I wanted to talk to you first, Emma said, settling into the chair across from Valerie's desk. I got some news today. Valerie studied her sister's face, looking for the warning signs she'd learned to recognize over the past year. But Emma's expression was calm, even excited, a far cry from the manic energy or desperate sadness that had characterized her before the breakdown. Good news or challenging news? Valerie asked, using the language Dr. Mitchell had taught them to distinguish between different types of difficulties. Good news. Great news, actually. Emma's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that still surprised Valerie sometimes. I got the job, the position at the Crisis Counseling Center. They want me to start next month. Valerie felt a surge of genuine pride and relief. Emma had been working toward this for months, completing additional certification, volunteering at support groups, slowly rebuilding her professional reputation, while focusing on a career that would let her use her own experience with crisis to help others. Emma, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard for this. I know I have. And I know it doesn't erase what I did, but it feels like I'm finally moving toward becoming someone I can respect instead of someone I'm ashamed of. They talked for a while about the details of the job, the training Emma would need to complete, her plans for gradually building back her independence. It was the kind of conversation Valerie had never imagined having with her sister. Practical, supportive, free of the undercurrents of resentment and manipulation that had characterized their relationship for so long. There's something else, Emma said as their conversation began to wind down. Marcus called me yesterday. Valerie felt her shoulders tense automatically. Emma's ex-fiancé had been supportive during her recovery, but their relationship remained complicated. Too much hurt on both sides for easy reconciliation, but too much genuine care for complete separation. How did that go? Better than I expected. He's engaged to someone else, someone he met in his own therapy group, actually. He wanted me to know before I heard it from mutual friends. Emma's voice was steady, without the bitter edge that mentions of Marcus had carried for months. And I was happy for him, Val. Genuinely happy. A year ago, that news would have sent me spiraling. Yesterday, it just made me grateful that he found someone who can love him without all the baggage I brought to our relationship. That's real growth, Em. It is. And it made me realize something else. Emma reached into the gift bag she'd brought and pulled out a small framed photo. I wanted to give you this. Valerie looked at the picture and felt her breath catch. It was from their childhood. Maybe when Valerie was 8 and Emma was 5, showing them building a sandcastle on the beach during one of their family vacations. Both girls were covered in sand, grinning at the camera with the unconscious joy of children who still believed their family was exactly what it appeared to be. I found it when I was cleaning out my apartment, Emma explained. For the longest time, I couldn't look at pictures like this because they felt like lies, evidence of a happiness that was built on secrets. But now I see something different. What do you see? I see 2 little girls who loved each other before they learned to compete for scraps of attention. I see a moment when we were just sisters, before I let my pain turn that love into resentment. Emma's voice grew stronger. I want to remember that we were happy sometimes, Val. That not everything about our childhood was poisoned by the secrets our parents kept. Valerie traced the edge of the frame with her finger, remembering that day. She'd been so proud of their sandcastle, so excited to show their parents what they'd built together. Emma had insisted on adding a moat, declaring it essential for proper castle defense. We were a good team, Valerie said softly. We were. And maybe we can be again in a different way. Not as the codependent sisters we were trained to be, but as 2 adults who choose to be in each other's lives because we genuinely care about each other. The weight of that choice, the daily decision to rebuild rather than abandon their relationship, had been one of the hardest parts of the past year. There had been setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, times when Valerie had wondered if it would be easier to simply walk away. But sitting here now, looking at evidence of who they'd been before everything got complicated, she felt a quiet certainty that the work had been worth it. David appeared in the doorway, grass stains on his knees and dirt under his fingernails. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation brewing out there. What kind of situation? Valerie asked, immediately alert to potential problems. The good kind, David said, his grin answering her unspoken worry. Your parents just pulled up, and they're arguing about whether the wine they brought is appropriate for a casual dinner or if they should have brought something less formal. Emma burst out laughing, a sound that still surprised Valerie with its lightness. Some things never change. No, Valerie agreed, standing to greet their parents. But some things do. As they walked toward the front door together, Valerie reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A year ago, their family had been held together by secrets and careful management. Today, they were building something new, messier, more honest, requiring constant work and daily choices to show up for each other despite past hurts. It wasn't the perfect family she'd once dreamed of creating, but it was real, and it was theirs. And it was built on a foundation that could actually support the weight of their complicated love for each other. Outside, she could hear her mother's voice raised in mock exasperation as Robert defended his wine selection, and Emma calling out a greeting that was answered with genuine warmth. The sound of her family, imperfect, healing, choosing each other one difficult day at a time, was better than any fairy tale ending she could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.